Great lawyers don't always know how to build great law firms. Let's change that. Join Ben Gideon as he shares hard-won lessons from building his own financially successful law firm and practical insights from top law firm entrepreneurs, business consultants, and more. This is a podcast for lawyers, by lawyers. Welcome to Elevate, Build, and Grow Your Law Firm. Produced and powered by Law Pods.
Today's episode of the Elevate, Build, and Grow Your Law Firm podcast is brought to you by Supio. I just spent an hour doing a webinar with the Supio folks. It was great. We had the head of business development and also one of the lawyers from Texas who's been an early adopter of Supio and walked through some case models of how you use Supio to put a case together. It was very, very impressive. I would encourage everyone who doesn't yet have an AI platform for their law firm, if they're a plaintiff's side, personal injury, medical malpractice type of law firm, check out Supio and get the demo. Our podcast today is also brought to you by Vision Spark. Vision Spark is the company that helps law firms and other businesses find seconds in command. You know any seconds in command, Jeff?
That would be me. It's exactly where I want to be.
When I think of number two, I always think of Jeff.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that.
We have Vision Spark to credit for the search process that led us to Jeff, and then Jeff has led us to the holy grail of, it appears, to doubling our revenues in less than a year of your time at our firm. So it's all paid off very well. Anybody who needs a second in command like Jeff, I would encourage you to talk to Vision Spark. Our podcast is also brought to you by 1% for Planet. 1% for Planet, folks, is the organization that allows you to contribute 1% of your gross revenues to environmentally conscious nonprofits. Our firm has done that. It's a great organization that's allowed us to partner with some really terrific nonprofits in Maine and throughout northern New England, and we really would love to have other firms join us in that. And if you do join us in 1%, please reach out to us and we'll give you a plug on the show.
Welcome to the Elevate, Build, and Grow Your Law Firm podcast. I am Jeff Wright, Chief Operating Officer at Gideon Asen, and as always, joined by our host, owner, attorney, Benjamin Gideon.
Hey, Jeffrey.
How are you?
I'm doing great. I was just commenting on your attire. Do you want to enlighten our listeners as to what you're wearing today?
Yeah, I can. For those of you, anyone watching, we have a sweatshirt post successful trial that Ben tried with Merrill Pool in here, where we got a positive outcome for our client. There was, during Ben's closing, there was a very quick objection that was very quickly sustained that I don't think anyone saw coming, but Ben pivoted very quickly and professionally and kept his closing along the exact same lines, just using some different words. So we memorialized it with a sweatshirt for everybody here at the firm.
It's become a tradition that after a trial win, we're getting little gifts, swag gifts for everybody. The last one we did was there's always a bison theme that's sort of a bison wearing a suit. It's a long story, which we don't need to.
We don't have time.
Cover. We don't have to. We should devote a whole episode to the American bison and its influence on Gideon Asen.
Yeah, somehow we're a firm in Maine, but we've adopted the American bison from out west as our firm's spirit animal. But
not to be confused with the buffalo.
No,
We're talking about the bison here.
exactly. We don't have time to discuss the difference either.
Nor do we know the difference.
It's an excellent point. We should probably look into that.
Well, I was just telling Jeff before we got on the air today, I came from my daughter's senior project, which was great because she was job shadowing the aforementioned Merrill Poolin, lawyer extraordinaire, Gideon Asen, and great role model for a young woman who may someday want to go into the law. And watching my daughter present about a couple of the cases that she observed and some of the activities she participated in was really cool to behold because I can see the future.
Oh, geez. You're not forcing her, are you?
And I'm not forcing her, but there'll be some carrots and some sticks.
Yeah. So this is your last child heading off to college.
Right.
How you feeling about that? Going to be an empty nester?
I'm not looking forward to it.
No.
I like having the kids around.
Yeah. Well, she's not going too far. She's heading down to
Yeah.
Boston. So.
Yeah, BU. So I'll be driving down for the Bean Pot tournament and other random events where I'll show up at her dorm room unannounced. It'll be great.
With a bison sweatshirt on. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to see you.
All right. Well, I guess we should transition into something more.
Well, the aforementioned daughter just peeked in your room.
Oh, she did. Nice.
Yeah. So obviously we've had a busy couple weeks. Last week, we onboarded a summer intern from Maine Law who's going to be with us for the summer. And we onboarded a brand new litigation attorney to fill out our litigation teams. So a lot of work last week and going to be a lot of work going forward. Obviously getting the litigation attorney up and running and acclimated to our current cases and, involving our intern to get him as much exposure as possible while he's here for the 3 months. So it's been a good couple weeks.
Yeah, we're super busy. So why don't I introduce the topic today since I'm the one who suggested it. I thought we could kind of have a little bit of fun and just depart from marching through different operations and systems things. And this is an idea I've had that I wanted to do for a little while because probably like everybody way back, I read Sun Tzu's Art of War, didn't really understand why I was reading it or what its application was to anything. But I always there were a couple of the concepts there that lingered with me over the years. And then more recently, I found a book called Sun Tzu and the Art of Business, which is kind of takes the concepts from the original text, which is about 2,500 years old at this point, and applies it to the modern world of business. And when I went back and read that, it was just amazing to me how many of those concepts resonated with what we're doing and probably what every small business encounters as they're building out a business and trying to figure out what's the strategy, what battles should be fought, what's the territory you want to dominate or occupy and so forth. And so I thought we could I've distilled down 6 or 7 of the core principles from the 2 books and wanted to talk about how it applies to building and growing a law firm. And hopefully folks will find some translatable principles here, no matter what kind of firm, whatever stage of growth or development you're in. I think a lot of these principles are timeless and universally applicable. So hopefully there'll be some value there. So just to, we can launch in, why don't we introduce each principle one at a time, then we can have a little bit of discussion around it and apply it in the way we've seen it apply, and more generally how it may apply to those building and growing a firm. So kind of the first principle, that's the one that I think Sun Tzu is, if you asked anybody who read the original book, what the big takeaway from it is, it's this first principle, which is that a great warrior, a great champion wins the battle without having to fight. And the concept there is that, what would seem fairly obvious in a couple ways. One is that the goal of being a general or warrior, or in this case, entrepreneur or a law firm owner, the goal is not the conflict. The goal is what you're trying to achieve that occasionally requires some amount of conflict in order to accomplish. Similar to if you were a general leading an army, you might want to take some territory, you might want to develop a sphere of influence, and one way to accomplish that might be to engage the enemy in battle on the field, right? But Sun Tzu's point is that process of conflict and fighting is enormously draining. It saps your resources, it saps your energy, it leads to attrition. Obviously, in the real world of real combat, it leads to death and, all the things that go with that. So his big kind of insight in the book is the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without having to fight. it's worth thinking about that in the context of a business. The idea of that is that there are different ways you can accomplish the same goal. And one way, of course, is to go head on against the enemy and engage in battle. But other ways of doing the same things are positioning yourself so that the enemy backs down or doesn't see any need to fight or doesn't want to fight or is convinced before the battle starts that they can't win and therefore they choose not to fight. And so then you get to, take the territory without a fight and save yourself all the resources, all the battles, and potentially marshal those resources for other battles that need to be fought. There's a lot of cliches in there, but Jeff, just before we get into the applicability of that to the business world and what we're trying to accomplish, what's your top line takeaway from that concept?
Yeah, and I think there were two big takeaways when I was reading, your blurb on that, and I think we practice this well here. And I think the first thing was one of our core values really equates to this, where we make decisions based on science and data and not ego. And I think wanting to fight, wanting to get in the courtroom, wanting to quote unquote destroy your opponent in a public place and show your skill set to a jury, a lot of that is ego driven to a certain extent. But, I look at a recent case that we had here. We had an attorney, Trevor, one of our extremely good attorneys, who did such a good job with a case and depositions and everything else. And as much as he wanted to take that case to trial, they were doing everything in their power to settle, and which was the right decision for the client. So in some ways, they were completely subdued without going to that final battlefront, I guess, if we're using that terminology of having to litigate the case in front of a jury. So those were kind of my two takeaways and translations for how this pertains to us.
I think there's a lot of applicability to these concepts to the trial practice side of our business, apart from the business growth side of the business, and what you just identified as one of them. I mean, there are people that would make the case that if you have to try a case, you've already lost, in a sense of your optimal outcome would be to get a significantly outsized settlement for your client because A, that eliminates the risk. B, you've already recovered, multiples of case value. And C, you don't have to expend the resources, time, money that it takes to try a case, which we all know is extremely burdensome for everybody. But back to the business side of it, I mean, the ways I've thought about this a lot in building our business are, if you look at, each different sector of law firm businesses, but we're mostly familiar, obviously, with the plaintiff's personal injury, medical malpractice type of practice, but I'm sure this applies across the board to every kind of law firm business. There is a race to the bottom in terms of people that are competing in a cutthroat way for clients and doing so primarily based on price and based on volume, in the sense of, mass marketing, trying to build high volume factories with a cookie cutter system to handle routine cases for clients. And the issue is that when you have that kind of competition, when everybody's fighting the battle, in Sun Tzu's terms, what happens is that your resources get sucked up into case acquisition costs because it becomes more and more expensive to acquire the case. Because if everyone's advertising on Google, the AdWord price goes up. If everyone's marketing on television, or just pick whatever venue you're marketing in, if there's demand fueled by lots of lawyers competing, the price of acquisition of the cases goes up. And as that happens, Google gets richer, Facebook, Meta gets richer, and the lawyers get poorer. because their margins go down. And we made a very distinct decision that we never want to be competing on that battlefield where there's a lot of lawyers fighting over price and volume. So we've defined our territory differently, which is we're competing on quality, we're competing on performance, we're competing on value added. So that allows us to, in a large sense, in many of the areas where we are acquiring cases, it allows us to avoid that cutthroat competition that drives down margins and makes Google richer and all the lawyers poorer. So just one way that principle of not fighting the battle applies to the law firm practice. The other ways we think about it are, if you think of Sun Tzu's point that the great warrior doesn't have to fight the battle because the enemy sees that it's futile, that they're so overwhelmed and overmatched that they just don't want to take the field. And so they cede the territory without the fight. That happens for us all the time. After we started our firm, we acquired a very high percentage of our local market share in medical malpractice cases, really without any fight, because there was no battle for that. Generally, it's a niche practice that's very difficult to manage. It's expensive. Most lawyers don't want to enter into that field. And so there's very little competition for those cases. And so again, we were able to take that territory without the battle. Then we were able to spin that off into other complementary practice areas that are also resource intensive, capital and knowledge intensive, where once we accumulated an advantage, a competitive advantage, it's very hard for other lawyers to compete with us. And as we continue to grow, develop more resources, better internal systems, it just becomes increasingly hard for anybody to compete. And so most of the territory, again, market share that we've acquired has been done without any fight. Nobody's really, there's been no competition for it. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy the more we consolidate our lead, so to speak. And I think it's just a great lesson for any law firm business that the key is to find that area where you can bring a unique competitive advantage with unique value added right from the outset, even if it's a very small niche, even if it's a niche that nobody really wants. But as long as there's enough to fuel your small firm at the beginning, it's a great foothold or a beachhead, to then build from. And then once you get that advantage, find ways to perpetuate your advantage. And then, like Sun Tzu's point, you don't have to fight with anybody because people realize that it's not worth fighting. You've already got such a distinct advantage and knowledge and experience and resources or whatever the case may be that they're going to let you have that territory for free.
Yeah. I think one of the things that, everyone has to keep in mind with that, even though they might give it to you for free, you have to build your reputation and you have to build your results. Part of the reason why we're dominating the med mal practice in our area is the reputation of you and Taylor and the firm as a whole, but also the results is, the proof in the pudding, as they say. We have no problem seeing a case all the way through and taking it to litigation and have been lucky enough to have, a strong history of outsized results and in some cases record-setting results in multiple states. So, you have to maintain the reputation and you have to get the results in addition.
Yeah, and there's a way in which there's an internal conflict in this principle because one way that you acquire the reputation of being a great warrior that nobody wants to fight in the Sun Tzu language, or a great, lawyer in the trial world that nobody wants to fight against, is to have some proven
victories, some wins in the battlefield, right? And so I do think that's really important. I mean, we try cases. We're not afraid to try cases. And it's that record of having verdicts, which no one can really question. I mean, a verdict is a black and white thing that you either get it or you don't. It's not spin. It's an actual accomplishment that no one can take away from you. So there's a countervailing principle in the never fight the battle principle of sometimes you do have to fight a battle or two to burnish your reputation to get those seminal accomplishments. And again, it's not just in the trial world, but in any law field, those actual real world results and accomplishments that are recognizable in your industry, both to consumers and to your peers, those are priceless. And I think, for lawyers that are getting there, starting out, getting those under your belt early in your career is so critical because there's a compounding interest effect of that, which is you get that verdict or you're known for putting together that, big merger deal, or you've argued the seminal, immigration case to the Supreme Court in your state. You made a name for yourself. That is going to carry through for the rest of your career and allow you to build off of that. Whereas if you're shying away from those opportunities and you wait and don't seize the opportunity to, obtain those kind of accomplishments until later in your career, you're postponing that ability for that to continue to pay dividends for you. So you do have to, strategically fight a battle or two here and there for sure. Moving on to the next principle, Sun Tzu says you should avoid strength and attack weakness. Attack where your opponent is weak. Do not attack strength directly. Again, all of these things kind of in reflection seem obvious, but if you could think about, 2,500 years ago, armies on the battlefield, probably the conventional approach to warfare was just to find where the enemy's armies had massed and to go get them right where, launch a head-on attack. It wasn't necessarily to creatively identify weaknesses in supply chains and, work backwards from there. Now, I wasn't around then, but this is what Sun Tzu's commenting on. And frankly, I think that tends to be a guiding philosophy that a lot of people in business still follow, right? They see a competitor, their mindset is, well, we're better than they are at that, or we should be able to beat them at that game. Let's just go head on and take them on there, right? And what Sun Tzu is saying is that's generally not a good strategy. If you want to build out your practice in, let's say, Philadelphia or Tampa, Florida, the idea of going head to head with Morgan and Morgan, for example, is probably not a very smart business move. What you want to be attempting to identify is where are those vulnerabilities, those areas of weakness where we can find an opening that allows us to break through and succeed. So that's principle 2, avoid strength, attack weakness. So yeah, Jeff, let's apply that to building and growing a law firm.
Yeah, you had made some notes here and I was going to hit on the marketing first. When we brought in a marketing director and we looked at our landscape, a lot of the firms doing marketing were the more volume PI firms that have been around for a long time, but looking for, the volume type cases, more gimmicky type advertising. And we made a conscious effort to kind of find a niche and go in a different direction with a very straightforward, authentic Ben and Taylor, front facing firm in all of our advertising. So we didn't do anything to go head to head with them. We really took a different avenue and immediately out of the gate differentiated ourselves from our competition as opposed to being lumped in with them.
Right. I mean, even beyond that, we fairly explicitly, part of our messaging is that we don't want every case. We're not the right lawyer for everyone. And part of our advertising language is that We're careful about the cases we choose because we want to make sure every client has our full attention and so forth. We very distinctly, maybe not as directly, but certainly contextually, are saying we're not a volume business. We don't want to be a volume business. We want to be different.
Yeah. And I think beyond marketing, we know where other firms struggle, because I think this firm has had the same struggles as other firms. Response time to intakes, response time to referring attorneys, keeping referring attorneys in the loop once they provided a referral, are things that most firms are not good at. I can tell you, working very closely with our intake team, we hear multiple times a week when we call a potential client back, they say, I've called 8 firms and you're the only one that's gotten back to me. And even if we're unable to help them and we decline them because it's outside our expertise or whatever it is, they are thrilled just to have a conversation with us, and they remember our name and everything else. But firms are not very good at that. We get a lot of referrals from attorneys, and we treat each and every one of those very gingerly. We take the time to reach out to the potential client. We take the time to circle back with that referring attorney and let them know what the outcome was. Even if we're not taking the case on, we let them know. We thank them for thinking about us. And it's those little things that are differentiating us, because every firm struggles with those, especially on the intake side, I think.
No, 100%. And I mean, applied to that Sun Tzu principle of avoiding strength and attacking weakness, what you're identifying here is that what we noticed is that many law firms, one of their weaknesses is their back office management. So they're not good at the blocking and tackling, and they are alienating clients, they're alienating referring attorneys because they're not able, not because they necessarily don't want to, but they don't have the systems and the personnel that make them capable of timely responses, professionalized assistance. And a lot of lawyers who refer cases to us do it because they know as soon as they send the case over, whether it's a phone call or an email, that we're going to jump right on it. And they feel confident, number one, that if it is a viable case and it has value, that we're going to be able to capture that value for them. And secondly, they're able to confidently tell their clients that they're going to get good service, which in many cases is more important to them. They want, if a client calls and they want to talk to a experienced med mal lawyer, for example, and they say, well, we're going to refer you over to this firm, they want to know that that firm is going to close the loop and actually talk to this person. They're not going to get a call back 3 days later from that person saying, hey, that lawyer you referred us to, they never contacted me, right? And so we made a conscious effort to, in terms of attacking weakness, we perceived there being a weakness in the management side of the businesses, and that we would have a competitive advantage if we could do better by having better systems and structures. And it really, that's been a real distinguishing feature. I actually think many of the referring lawyers are refer to us regularly just because they have confidence that they know once that referral is made, it's 100%, taken care of. And then, part of that is also just the entire culture of what we've built, that the staff, when our intake staff does speak to that person, we know, we have a high degree of confidence that that phone call is going to be empathetic, that it's going to be professional, that the person on the other end of the phone is going to have a good experience. And if they do report back to the referring lawyer, hey, thank you for sending us over to Gideon Asen, because they couldn't take my case, but they got right back to me. They treated me with respect. They were great. Appreciate that. And
it goes a long way.
Yeah.
Need help on a complex personal injury or medical malpractice case? Gideon Asen accepts case referrals and regularly co-counsels with lawyers nationwide on high-value claims. The firm has recovered millions of dollars in cases that competitors turned away because they dig deeper. Ready to learn more? Email bgideon@gideonasenlaw.com to start the conversation. Gideon Asen shares fees as permitted by the laws of each state. Don't let complex cases overwhelm your practice. Elevate justice together with Gideon Asen.
So looking at the next Sun Tzu principle is choose your battlefield. The best generals choose favorable terrain. So do you want to talk about that, Jeff?
Yeah, and you had mentioned before, I think we're lucky enough to kind of be in Maine and the environment we're in. I think we would do things differently if we were in Los Angeles or Philadelphia or New York, because it's a completely different environment with different competitors. But our goal out of the gate with marketing, with everything else, was to dominate, our area of Maine and our geographic area where we're headquartered, where we're located, in very particular areas, med mal, catastrophic personal injury. We don't stray very far from those. I mean, obviously there's some premises liability, some product liability, but we don't strain overly far from those. And then when we're looking to expand, we're looking at neighboring states. We're looking at New Hampshire. We're looking at Vermont. We're looking at areas where we feel there's a need for our services, an area where we can add value to maybe an underserviced population of higher end, more complex med mal attorneys. And we're doing it methodically. All of our marketing, all of our spend right now is centered in Maine, but we're almost using that as a testing ground and perfecting it. And it's going to be very easy to replicate out of state. So this is some of the things that we're obviously working on and about choosing your battlefield wisely.
Right. I mean, Sun Tzu makes the point that, again, seems quite obvious, but that it's easy to expand into undefended territory. If you want to take territory and it's undefended, you can just march in there and take it. If you're trying to take areas that are heavily defended, that's going to require battle. It's going to require expenditure of resources, attrition, and all the things we talked about. And so, it's kind of the blue ocean business strategy, but we've been very intentional about identifying areas of undefended territory. And there, you mentioned Los Angeles and Philadelphia. I'm sure that it is extremely difficult in the highly competitive market areas in this country to find undefended territory. But if you are creative and look carefully enough, I'm confident that no matter where you are, you can find areas of undefended territory. And let me just give you some kind of examples of that might trigger your own thinking to figure out undefended territory where you are. But so one is thinking about geographic, as you alluded to. We are embarking on a plan to work closely with a Vermont firm that we've worked with closely for years. And as part of that, we've learned that in some of the areas where we regularly practice, there are very few lawyers in Vermont that are taking those kind of cases. And so, we've identified a really potentially great opportunity there to expand our geographic reach in an area where there's undefended territory geographically. Here's another example of undefended territory. It's not necessarily geographic precisely, but we get a very substantial percentage of our best cases referred to us from lawyers all over the country in states far outside of Maine. Some of those cases are actually located in those other states. We just had a very significant case out in California, for instance, that we did. And some of those cases are actually in Maine, New Hampshire, or Vermont, but the lawyers know us in other states. And that's completely undefended territory. We're really the only law firm in Maine or northern New England that has a national reputation. And so all of that category of case, which tends to be really, high value cases, because what happens is someone in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, they need a lawyer. They have a brother-in-law who's a lawyer in Chicago. They call their brother-in-law and say, hey, I've got this really big case. I need the best lawyer, Maine or New Hampshire, Vermont. Who do you recommend? they reach out to their colleagues in Chicago and they get our name. And that just happens repeatedly over and over again. And so that's another example. That's completely undefended territory. There's nobody else we're competing with for those type of cases. Another example of undefended territories we've alluded to is just the type of practice. So in our case, medical malpractice as a case type tends to be fairly undefended because it's a very niche area that many lawyers don't want. But then as you build out from there, you can identify other types. Like we've had great success in trucking cases, which lawyers all want those cases, but very few have positioned themselves with specialized expertise and have enough reps doing those cases in a high value way to be able to make the claim that they do have specialized expertise in trucking litigation. So that's an example. Industrial cases, we've had big verdicts in industrial accidents. We are handling some of the most high-profile industrial, and I'm talking about explosions, fires, electrocutions, workplace issues, not workers' comp, but third-party workplace incident claims. That's another area that's largely undefended. There's really very few lawyers who have specialized expertise or hold themselves out. And I think that whatever area you're in, if you can define down the practice type or the referral base you're talking about, lawyers around the country that are part of this different organization, this specific subspecialty of this subspecialty, you're always going to be able to find some undefended territory that you can move into effectively first. It just takes a little while to figure that out. Okay, so let's move on to the next principle. And this is the principle that intelligence is what wins wars. Foreknowledge is the foundation of victory. And Sun Tzu in his book talks a lot about the importance of the general having great networks of informants, spies, or intelligence capabilities to understand the enemy and what makes them tick. And not just enemy strategically, but the enemy mindset, enemy's emotional state. What are the enemy generals' trigger points? What is their ego like? How are they likely to respond to different types of stimuli or different types of actions? It's a fascinating thing. And think in our line of work, something that we, I think maybe in corporate America, there's more of a effort to do opposition research on your competitors and to really fully understand where they're coming from and what their next move might be. I've not really heard a lot about that in the legal space. I don't know what your thoughts. I mean, you come from a banking background. Was that something that people thought about? What is the competitor bank doing? Who's the founder or the owner or the CEO of that other bank? And if we do this, what are they likely to do in response, and all that kind of gaming it out?
Yeah, 100. Yeah, I mean, on the banking side, we saw that a lot. And, banking in Maine was very different. I mean, Maine is from a population standpoint, a very small state, but it's extremely overbanked. A lot of banks, a lot of credit unions, a lot of competition. And, we kept an eye on all our competitors. We kept an eye on their rates. We kept an eye on where they were opening new branches and trying to understand, okay, they're opening a branch in this area for a reason. What are they seeing that we're not seeing? And every time a new competitor came in, I mean, JP Morgan Chase came to Maine, I think 4 years ago. And I think Maine was one of the last states that JP Morgan Chase came into. But when they came in, they opened 4 branches in 4 of the wealthiest areas of Maine. They obviously have a lot more money than probably every bank in Maine put together. So everyone said, well, they know what they're doing. We know, we need to do better in these areas. Unfortunately, being in the smaller bank world, most of the things we did were reactive and not proactive, which isn't the best way to deal with competition. I would much rather be the one out in front and force your competition to make moves to counteract you. I feel like we're doing that here, where we're I don't want to use the word groundbreaking, but we're doing a number of things that I feel are forcing our competition's hand to try and play catch up. And I think that's important.
One example of this concept in action was when we made the decision to launch our direct consumer marketing, which included television, radio, Google AdWords, pay-per-click, and other modalities. We knew that that was going to likely ruffle some feathers, particularly among some of our most reliable referring partners, because some of them do market and that they may see that as competing with them for the valuable cases and undercutting them. And I mean, we actually gamed out specifically what are our various competitors likely to do when we launch our marketing. Are we going to lose this element of our referral business? And knowing the individual personalities, we were able to have a pretty good sense for what they would do in response. And we were very proactive. So we weren't waiting to see what happened. We actually made a plan that before we launched, Taylor and I, the two partners, were going to go and meet individually with each of our best referring lawyers and to tell them we were about to launch a TV ad campaign. And because we didn't want them to see it or hear it from somebody else first, and we wanted to make sure that the relationship could, withstand that in the instance that we cared enough about that referral relationship to think that that had value. But at the same time, the other thing we recognized was that when we started to acquire cases through the direct-to-consumer marketing, because we were not going to want a whole category of those cases, the volume cases for our own practice, that was going to give us an asset that we could then use to become a firm that would be referring those out to other firms ourselves. And that asset itself gave us the opportunity to develop relationships. So there were firms that had never sent us a case, or not many, and we developed great alliances with some of those firms to refer cases to them. And now they refer all their cases to us. And so not only did it end up not being a detriment to us, but we actually developed some better relationships from that marketing effort, but only because we had gamed it out, thought very intentionally about what effect will this have and how can we mitigate or capitalize on the new landscape once that happens. And one of the things we thought was, well, what will our other competitors who don't market, how will they react to our marketing? And one way they could react is by marketing themselves and trying to compete with us. And we expected that would happen at some point. It hasn't yet, but we fully anticipate that it would and had planned for that. But really, we thought that the first step would be that they would then use our marketing to try to go and interfere with our referral relationships by suggesting to those attorneys that refer cases to us that, hey, these guys aren't really your friends anymore. They're trying to take your business or trying to undercut. And because we did the hard work of going and talking to folks and making them comfortable with, what we were doing, that didn't pan out. But actually that exact thing happened. We heard from lawyers that had traditionally referred cases to us that competitors had gone to them and said and made exactly that pitch. And so we knew that was going to happen because we know the personalities involved. We could predict how they would react. And we were like 100% correct in our predictions. And we had already prophylactically addressed the problem because we went through that exercise of thinking it through and, using our intelligence about the legal industry to make smart choices there. So, and I should say, like, this idea of intelligence, I give my partner Taylor a lot of credit because Jeff, as you know, he tends to be kind of a hub of gossip.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
when anything's going on in our world, for some reason, everybody feels like they can reach out to Taylor and kind of tell him about it. And Taylor's always on the phone with everybody, talking about things, wheeling, dealing, you know, gossiping. And so it would be rare in our state for anything to be happening without Taylor knowing about it. And he always knows about it way before I do. And then, you know, I'm
And it's
hearing
extremely
it from him.
valuable.
It is.
I mean, he is. He's like the hairdresser or the bartender of the firm. The people tell him everything. It's great. It
Yeah.
gives us an opportunity to discuss things, you know, as a leadership team that may be coming down the pipe.
Yeah, and I mean, if it were me without Taylor as my partner, we wouldn't have a lot of this information. And I think it's worth thinking about in your organization. Do you have somebody like that who just likes to talk to people and is kind of a conduit for information? Because if you don't have somebody like that, you're at a real disadvantage, and you might want to either thinking about doing more of that yourself or finding somebody who is good at those skills of, you know, reaching out to people, talking, gossiping, getting information. Because it is a real skill. I mean, Taylor, he just is good at, it's two things. A, he's unafraid to reach out to anybody at any time to have a conversation. And B, he has the kind of personality that other people like talking to. He's not argumentative or judgmental toward them. He's a listener and just doesn't let his ego interfere with that. And so I think people are comfortable calling him and talking to him and sharing things with him. It's a real skill set. And sometimes it's not something that is obvious or so easy to value. But when you see over time the power it gives you because of the knowledge you have, it's extremely valuable.
It's invaluable. I mean, it translates well beyond a referral network. I mean, the relationships that Taylor, you know, has and the groups he belongs to and the groups he participates in, you know, that allows him to be part of those organizations and give speeches and everything else, just further, you know, getting the Gideon Asen name out there and lending more credibility to it. It's invaluable, the relationships that he creates.
So let's move on to the next principle, which is speed is a competitive advantage. Sun Tzu says speed substitutes for strength. And the obvious point here is that if you can act swiftly, take decisive action early before the enemy is able to erect their defenses, there's territory you can take, things you can accomplish simply because you can act fast that you wouldn't be able to if you dragged your feet. And this is something that's very personal to me because, as folks who listen know, I was at a different firm for the better part of my career. And it was a terrific firm. At this point, it's more than 100 years old, but we were somewhat hamstrung by our governance model, which was a committee. It was a decision by committee approach. And because there were no, living founder owners that had the ability to make decisions on their own, and things had to be made by committee, by consensus of a bunch of lawyers. And we all know, anybody who's tried to manage a law firm knows how difficult that can be. It was very hard to make decisions quickly or to take decisive action quickly. And there were, in my feeling, there were many lost opportunities there for that firm to have more aggressively consolidated their, at the time, huge advantage, competitive advantage in the market share and the space they were in, simply because they just couldn't get out of their way to do things. And it's just been so liberating to be at a firm where, as a founder owner, we have a small group of people and we have the capability of making decisions quickly and taking decisive actions. That they may not always succeed. We recognize that there will be failures, and we want to fail fast, learn from failures, iterate and grow and continue to adapt. But we are not unable to do things and do them quickly. I mean, if anything, in our business, in our firm, we suffer perhaps a little bit from the opposite problem of, sometimes moving too quickly in too many different directions. But I would definitely, having experienced the opposite for many, many years, I would definitely take this over that any day. Your thoughts, Jeff?
Yeah, and I think I've used this quote on a previous podcast. John Wooden, the great UCLA coach, used to say, "Be quick, but don't hurry." And I think it translates to us where we have a small group of decision makers. We meet often, and if something comes up, we try and methodically execute on whatever the outstanding question is or whatever the task is in a very quick manner, but without hurrying. I think we give it its due attention. We give it thought. Everyone has a voice. We come to a unanimous decision virtually every time, and then we decide to execute. We leave that meeting. Once we've made a decision, it's in place, and we start to execute on it immediately, whether it's later that day or first thing the next morning. There's a project plan in place or steps being taken to put our decision into action.
Right. And then we have a well-developed process to ensure that the execution part happens, which involves weekly meetings where we go through what we call our rocks, or the big items we're attacking, and then our pebbles, or the smaller tasks that also need to be done. The bigger problem we have is getting enough things on that list to keep Jeff busy, because half the time, by the time the ink dries on our list, Jeff has already done it or gone a long way towards doing it. And then he's like, well, what am I doing next? And so we're just trying to constantly dream up things for you to do. So, because, we want to hire somebody, staff, that goes on the list. And I mean, usually within a week, the job is posted, applicants are coming in. I mean, in the case of our lawyer hire, it took us 4 months, but we had jumped on that immediately. And one thing I really appreciate, Jeff, is when something gets on that list, I almost assume it's already done, even though it isn't, because I know that once it's on the list, it will be done. It's not going to slip through the cracks,
Yeah, we've been good at that. It's a part of our, reason we've had good success is we try and identify the areas that are important enough to make that list. I mean, don't make a list with 50, 60 items that you want to work on, because it means you're not going to get anything done. Pare your focus down, be very vigilant, be quick, but don't hurry. I don't know if we have time for another one, Ben. We're almost,
well, let's just go through the there's two more, and
yeah,
we don't have to belabor them, but I do think they're important. One is this one is particularly important, actually, in light of the last topic. It's feed success, starve failures. And the concept is try to figure out quickly what's working and what's not working. And Sun Tzu's point, I think, is that where there are areas of weakness, one instinct is to reinforce the area of weakness, so that because you feel bad about being weak somewhere and you want to turn that weakness into a strength, but actually that's the wrong thing to do. What you want to do is identify areas of strength and double down on that. So if your immigration practice is going gangbusters, but your criminal defense practice is, withering on the vine, some may say, well, we've got to devote more resources to criminal defense, bring in some more lawyers, put in some more marketing dollars behind that so we can even it out. But what Sun Tzu would say is that's a huge mistake. You should devote extra resources to the immigration practice where you're killing it and drive that to even greater success. And I think that's something, it's still in the works for us, but it really does ring true. I mean, one example we have is our intake standards. We've made a decision. There's whole categories of cases we don't want. We don't want the $25,000, $50,000 car accident. We don't do premises liability cases. There's a bunch of, there's dozens or hundreds of cases we see. We simply don't want to do them. And we could do those cases. We could, eke out a few bucks doing different categories of cases, but it's not where we add value. It's not our brand. It's not where we've had our high level of success and what generates our revenue and profits for our firm. And so we've doubled down on putting more resources into the areas that we're good at. And really almost every year we have tightened up our intake standards and been more and more selective. And that's a way of feeding our success and starving the failures, not trying to go beyond the areas where we are good. On the marketing side, this remains to be seen. I mean, one of the things we want our marketing person to do is be able to eventually come to us and tell us what's working and what's not working. And if there's something that isn't working, that's not an area where we're going to want to spend extra dollars to make it work. We're going to want to figure out what's working and then double down into that area, right? I mean, if Google AdWords are not producing, we're not going to start bolstering our budget for that to try to make them work. We're going to say, let's take that money and put it into radio or put it into television or something that is working. So that's the feed success, starve failure principle. And the very last principle is don't create unnecessary enemies. This is one that, again, rings true to me because a lot of lawyers, when they leave a law firm, there can be fights about, which cases or clients are coming with you and which staff might be joining you, or you can get mired down into fighting with people. And again, that just saps energy, saps resources. If you're out there, we're competing with people by marketing in a certain way, they don't like it. We went to lengths to smooth that over, to go and meet with people, to try to make sure the relationship was still good, because every enemy we create through any of actions that we're taking creates the potential for another battle or fight that we have to expend resources in that we don't want. And what we try to do, as I've alluded to it before, is try to use areas of goodwill or things where we can help other people to ensure that relationships stay strong. So for instance, we are very generous about if anybody asks us for work product, motions that we filed, they want help on their case, they want, anything that we can do to help, we always share that, no questions asked.
I sent our operations manual to a firm a couple of weeks ago.
Right. And we're 100% open book. We're 100% sharing. And that's what this podcast is about too. I mean, we just sat here and shared many of our own insights and competitive strategy, which many firms might think would be crazy to do because someone could just listen to this and see what we're doing and then try to find a way to outflank. But we don't think of the world that way. We think of it as we just want to be the best that we can be. And we will be more successful by being an open book, by sharing with others and collaborating with others, than if we try to be underhanded or look like we're hiding the ball from people. And that has gone a long way. A lot of the lawyers that we compete with in Maine, we do compete on some level, but we're also helping many of those lawyers by referring them cases, by giving them work product, by talking to them if they have a case that's coming up for trial and they want to brainstorm on ideas. We help people like that all the time. And, that goodwill can go a long way towards avoiding creating enemies. And every enemy we don't create, again, is just additional battle we don't have to fight.
I was going to say, it's funny. Taylor's heading, where's he going? AAJ? Is that what's up?
No, he's going to Trial Lawyer University.
Yeah, so Taylor's
maybe AAJ too. Yeah.
Maybe, but he's speaking out there, and his hour-long speech is on negotiations, and he ran it by me last week, and a big thing was that negotiations don't have to be adversarial and don't make enemies, with the individual that you're negotiating with. And it doesn't always have to be that way. And a lot of these, that you just talked about, Taylor's going to be talking about in his negotiation talk. It's interesting how it translates to so many different areas.
Well, great. I think we've covered all the Sun Tzu topics. That was fun.
That was good.
It's a great reminder of some of the kind of core foundational strategic principles that I think many of us can benefit from. So hopefully everyone will. And we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Great.
Thanks, Jeff.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks for listening to Elevate, Build and Grow Your Law Firm. Share with colleagues if you found it valuable. Remember, building a successful law firm takes discipline, strategy, and determination. But you're not alone. Produced and powered by Law Pods.